Greetings everyone, welcome to the Holocron. I'm Darth Loquitur and this is my 2022 Gear Efficiency Guide for the Star Wars Galaxy of Heroes mobile game. We're going to talk about how to use the resources given to you in the game to maximize the character development. And I'd like to remind everybody right here at the start, please use your lightsaber, hit that like button, that helps me and helps the channel. There's going to be a long holocron. What we can expect to see in here, first we're going to talk about the method by which we're going to analyze the gear acquisition. We're going to talk about some early game limitations. People who are just starting out the game are going to have a little bit different experience than the mid-game players. Then we're going to talk about the efficient gear acquisition category by category. We're going to break it up and talk about different gear pieces. Then we're going to move on to efficient relic acquisition, how to get the materials for relicing your characters. We're going to talk about some adjustments that'll happen in the late game, and if you should happen to be a person who's interested in spending, some of the spending concepts. Then we're going to go through everything again in a different way by going through shop by shop and showing a shop strategy for each shop to support this philosophy. And then the last thing we're going to do, we're going to break it down into energy spending and what you can do and how you can make this efficiency model work for you. So in order to establish a baseline, we need a method. We need to compare all of these different gear acquisition rates against some kind of standard. And in order to do that, we have to pick a timeline. So I picked a very long timeline. For most people who know statistics, things work out better over statistically a longer period of time. So I picked all 6 Galactic Legends and the Executor compared to a relatively new hyperdrive account. So that tells me over a very long period of time all the gear that I would need to do 6 entire Galactic Legend builds plus the Executor. And that gets me my gear pool. And then we have to figure out the timing. So now we have all of the gear required. Let's figure out how fast we can get it. So putting relic levels on characters will have to be the limiting factor. And we're going to calculate that based off of acquiring signal data out of the cantina. And the assumption here is that we're going to have 120 cantina energy that develops every day. We're going to grab that 45 free energy each day. And then I'm going with a very conservative 3 refreshes per week. That's a total of 15 or 216 per day over a very long period of time. That's our average cantina spend, including the refreshes. 80% of that we're going to use on signal data. We're going to reserve 20%. I put 15% there, but we're actually going to reserve 20% for character development. So in our standard, that's how we're going to set it up. We figure out how much signal data we need for all of these relics, divide that out, and it comes out to 125 weeks or 2 years and 5 months, about 2.5 years. If all we built was Galactic Legends and Executor, that's how long it would take just to farm the signal data. So if we set that as our timeline, we could say, okay, that could be a timeline. I looked at it from the gear side. Stun guns used to be a bottleneck, and now stun guns are in the daily challenges. So let's take a look at that. There's 8850 needed. We can get 62 a week or so from the daily challenges. That would put us on a timeline for 142 weeks, 2.74 years, which is slightly longer than the Cantina timeline that we talked about, but it does mean that once we start getting extra gear in from events and other sources within the game, that actually this will be shorter than the Cantina timeline. So it does put us right back on that signal data timeline. Carbantes are a known limit. We need 16,550 for the journey. And that's, again, approximately 62 per week from the challenges. And that puts us on a timeline that's over 5 years. So we can't select a timeline that's going to be over 5 years if the other stuff is going to take half that amount of time. It simply means that's a piece of gear that we're going to have to acquire and we're going to have to do more of. So that's how the standard works. We're standardizing it based on the Cantina signal data farm. Anything that's in a shorter timeline than that is okay. Anything that's on a longer timeline than that, which there's a lot of gear that we're still going to be on a longer timeline than that we're going to have to acquire out of the game. So we've established a pool total. We've decided on our timing. Now we're going to estimate and apply gear income from all the events in the game. Assault battles, galactic challenges, galactic war, conquest, raids, territory wars, territory battles, grand arena, all of it. We're going to add back even more gear requirements so that we can scavenge that for relic materials. And then any gear that's above 0, we have to figure out how to acquire. Now, a disclaimer here, I was going through this method and I was trying to put all of this data in, but at the end of the day, the assumptions and the variability that we have based on how frequently your guilds are launching raids, your placement in those raids, what tiers you can complete in assault battles, grand arena placements, it was far too many variables to manage. So at the end of the day, I did just have to make some assumptions on what average looked like, and I'm not going to go into detail and bore you to death with all that stuff, but just suffice to say, at some point I had to draw the line and say, okay, this is close enough. We applied that, and then this is going to be based on the rest of the gear. So with that in mind, with the standard set, it's time to apply some methods and see what we can do. Now, I will say, very early on in the game, if you go through this gear analysis, it's going to be a little bit different. There's going to be a few pieces that you're never going to have enough of. It'll be solved later in the game, but very early on, all your characters are low level, trying to get through that gear 8, 9 level, and they all need some of these pieces. And even though later on it'll be taken care of at a rate that's okay, early on, you won't be able to get caught up. So let's address some of those pieces first. Mark IV keypad salvage. This is something that you're going to need a lot of in the early game. You're not going to get enough of it out of the game. So even though eventually it's not an issue, you can pick it up on some hard nodes. Hard nodes 6E and 8D are good hard nodes early in the game on light side, so that's something where you could pick up those hard nodes if you want to farm those characters and still pick up more of the data pads or the keypad salvage. If you really need the keypad salvage, you can also go to 8H, which that node also has injector salvage that you'll need to farm very early in the game. So you can do that. Or 9E has other multiple good pieces on it. So you can farm this if you need to early game. You probably will have to within the first 3 months of play for sure. And if you're starting out at level 1 and you're not buying the hyperdrive bundle, you may need these even 4 or 5 months into the game. Mark VI syringes, same way. Eventually those will be taken care of. I like to farm these very early game. I farmed a lot of them on 3C. It put me way ahead. That's a node that has hollow lenses on it for relic materials. And I got way ahead on that 3C node, and that really helped me a lot. So farm them out of there if you can. Or you can use AD light side normal if needed. That also is a node with injector handles on it. So if you need to farm it with regular energy, you can do it over there. But pay attention to these early game, and then later try to wait for the game to give them to you. Hollow projectors are also an issue in the early game. You're never going to have enough of these. There's no way that you can possibly over-farm them, because anything that you get in addition to what you need for character gearing can be turned into erodium heat sinks for relics. And we're going to be doing that for a long time in the game. So early on, if you need to farm these, light side 9F is really our go-to node for these forever. But very early in the game, there's often a lot of pressure on your regular energy, and there's less pressure on your fleet energy. So when you need just 1 or 2 of these to move your characters along, you can use fleet 1G. It's one of the lower cost fleet energy nodes, and you can just grab up some of these hollow projectors to try to break the bottleneck early game. Mark III Carbantes, these are a limiting factor forever. In the early game, you're going to run into this right away. You'll be stuck on Carbantes on a lot of characters. The game is going to give them to you as rewards. I'm just going to tell you now, if you start farming these Carbantes directly and farm them for weeks, if you end up, let's say, ahead on Carbantes, you're just going to run into other limits later. So you're better off farming nodes that have other gear on them. If you pick a hard node that has a Carbante on it, that's wonderful. It helps you get a few more Carbantes off the hard nodes while you're getting characters. But typically, I'm going to, even in the early game, I'm going to want you to buy these from the guild store or occasionally from the shard shop. That's okay. But I do want you to avoid getting in there and farming Carbantes specifically. I know it's tempting, but you're much better off farming character shards or farming the other gear that we talked about, like the hollow projectors and things like that. The Carbantes will be the limiting factor for pretty much for the entire game. The rate at which we can acquire these is going to be the rate at which we push characters forward. And that's okay. It's okay to have that limiting factor. We just got to be smart about how we get them. All right, so now we're going to get into the meat of this whole program, which is the mid-game gear grind. And I'm defining mid-game, just you at least have some basic teams established. Most of the Bronzium pack characters are 7 stars already, which means that when you open Bronzium packs, the extra shards are going to go to the shard shop. When you first start in the game and you don't have those characters at 7 stars, you do get a lot of character shards from the Bronzium packs, but until your character gets to 7 stars, they're not going over into the shard shop, of course. So that reduces the amount of progress we can make in that regard. Generally, in the mid-game is going to be players between 150 and 300 million guilds, regular raids, average territory battles, territory wars. I'm going to say the accounts can go anywhere from 1.5 million to 7 million and still be in the mid-game. My main account has 3 Galactic Legends. I'm working on my 4th, and I still consider myself to be in the mid-game. It's still the same kind of grind that it is, down at 2 million, 3 million. There's just more characters that we've developed and maybe a few things go faster. But the mid-game really lasts until you have almost every character and ship in the game at 7 stars and you don't need to farm hard nodes anymore. That's when I would say that it's flipping over to what I would call the late game or the end game. So the mid-game encompasses most players in the game and certainly most people that are going to want to watch this video for efficiency. So formerly, the big 4 in gear, the things that were holding us back, stun cuffs, stun guns, Carbantes, and the Mark V droid callers. All 4 of those pieces were put in the daily challenges. All 4 of those pieces are now taken care of to some extent. The Carbantes were already in the gear challenge. So if you used to have an efficiency strategy and where you used to spend on the stun cuffs, the stun guns, and the Mark V droid callers, if you spend instead on the Carbantes, we're back to a very even playing field with how this works. So in the past, these define the pace of progress, and with this method, if you look at stun guns, you need just over 11,000 stun guns in total. And if I manage them by the what you get out of the events and all that stuff, I end up needing around 300 in total during the whole journey over 2.5 years. So that means you need to find about 2 extra pieces per week. So you may have to buy some stun cuffs out of the guild store, for example, at some point, but generally that piece will work itself out. Stun guns and droid callers, you will actually get more than needed, and once you're developed in the game, with the daily challenges now, you actually get enough stun guns and droid callers that you can convert some of those to relic materials, as well as some Mark 8 bio if you get ahead on that. So these things that used to be bottlenecks now are solvent, and they're actually enough that you can convert them to relic materials. So that's fantastic. The Carbante rate, we still need to get at least 18 pieces per week to meet the total need, and that's really not a lot. So with that in mind, if you make 2 or 3 purchases out of the guild store, 2 at 10 each, or 5 each when you can find them. So if you purchase 20 per week out of the guild store, you will meet this timeline. So it may seem like you need just a ton of Carbantes, but in fact, it comes in at a good rate. If you supplement that a little bit out of the shops, you're right where you need to be. Okay, these pieces are raid-only gear. What that means, you can't typically just go in and farm these somewhere. So if you haven't paid attention to your shops, if you haven't acquired enough of these pieces from the in-game stores as they come up, when you need them, you won't be able to just find a node and farm them. So because they only come out of shops and raids, you have to look carefully at these pieces. Now, if we look at how many total are needed as we've defined the journey, the droid callers are going to actually be in excess. The Mark 7 Nubian scanners, we need 7,200 of them. Mark 5 furnaces, we need 3,750. and the Mark 6 discs, we only need 1,800. So assuming that average loot for the events and spread across all possibilities evenly, we can get roughly 3,500 of each of these materials on our 2.5-year timeline. So if we look back to the numbers, the Mark 5 furnaces at 3,750, again, depending on statistics, we may end up a little bit short and need to buy like 250 of those over time out of the shops. But on the Nubian scanners, we're still going to need a lot. So what's that? 3,700 of those that we still need. So that's going to be a piece that we need to acquire quite a lot of. That's 30 additional per week, in addition to what we might get out of the raids. So 30 per week means that we're going to have to make quite a few purchases out of the guild store. In the Squad Arena store, this piece is also now available. It shows up randomly in the very lower right-hand corner of the Squad Arena store. And we can purchase them 5 at a time out of there. And that's good efficiency. The more we can get out of there, the more we can take the pressure off of our guild store. And the guild store is kind of our go-to store to fill in all kinds of gaps. So we're going to try to buy those out of the squad store when we can. We're going to keep a bank of currency in the squad store to make sure that we can get those Nubian scanners when they show up. And again, if you don't pay attention to these scanners, you're going to have a whole lot of characters stuck waiting on scanners. Or when you try to push your characters ahead, it's just going to be a menace trying to catch up. So keep a bank of those and make sure, even if you get up to 100 or 150 of them, keep buying them, because once you start using them up, you use them up 50 at a time and they go fast. Okay. Same thing with the guild store. We're going to keep a bank of currency, and this is one of the pieces that we're going to look to buy. There's some other pieces of gear that you can get in various areas of the game, and these pieces of gear can be farmed. They do come out of events, but they can't. They typically don't have a crystal purchase out of the shop. So let's say it's the raid gear often has crystal purchase price, but it isn't farmable. These pieces of gear are farmable, but let's say it's an anti-whaling strategy, where if you're out of these Mark 10 HoloLenses, it doesn't matter how much money you try to spend, you're not going to get caught up on these HoloLenses. So these are some typical types of gear that you're really going to have to pay attention to out of the store. And we're going to try to keep a bank of these, so when they show up in the shops, we're going to try to buy them. The Mark 10 HoloLens, I like to keep over 100 of them if I can. So let's say I have 62 of them and they show up in the guild store. I want to be able to keep making those purchases, because at the moment that I need them, again, they'll go away quickly, and I don't want to have to spend crystals, or I don't want to have to farm them if I don't have to. So these pieces of gear in general aren't too bad. The Mark 10 HoloLenses, the total rate we need is about 8 to 10 per week over 125 weeks. So if you can make 1 or 2 purchases of 5 each every week, you'll stay in good shape on the Mark 10 HoloLenses. The Mark 7 Bio comes up about 200 short over the course of the entire 2.5 years. If you're working on a certain series of characters where this material is used frequently, you're going to run out, and you're going to have to either buy them out of the shops or farm them, or wait a while for them to show up. So overall, over a long period of time, statistically, they're pretty much taken care of, but you do have to acquire some. And so again, just pay attention to them, try to build up a bank and have them in store when you need them. Both of these items can be bought in both the guild and in the shard shop when they show up. You can also, if you really want to push your progress, you can also farm them directly. You can't buy them with cash, though. You can't just go into the shop somewhere and buy a 50 pack of them for 1,400 crystals like you can for other gear pieces. Okay, so with that in mind, let's move on to the next category. And these are kind of the big showstoppers in terms of bottlenecks with the 2022 gear system. You just can't get enough of these Kyros, and the newer characters all require multiple Kyros at a very high level. The Bad Batch are an example. It's just obscene the amount of Kyro that you need to put into these characters. But luckily we have a formula for taking care of these. If we look at the shock prods, we need 8,000 of them for the whole journey, the sequence that we've put together, and we need 4,700 of the computers, just a little more than half. So 21 per week from daily quests and more from events. Now remember, you get 3 every time you complete all quests and you complete all daily quests, you get 3 Kyros. So you get like 21 free from that. You get a bunch from events and other things like that. So over the 125-week timeline, we will accumulate roughly 5,200 in total between both types. And that leaves us with a huge gap, almost over 7,000, like 7,500 Kyros that we have to pick up from farming or from shops. So that's a huge gap. 17 per week of the computer and 43 per week of the shock prod. Quite a bit. So what I do is I use the Grand Arena shop to purchase the computers. You can get 20 per week without too much trouble, even with pretty modest performance in your Grand Arena. It's 1,400 Grand Arena currency in total to pick up those 20 per week. The farm node for the computers is really subpar. We want to avoid farming the computers if we can. So we're always going to prefer to spend our GAC currency there and stock up on the computers. Until you have both of the premium ships that you can buy for the Guild Event Token 2, I do recommend to use the Get To on those ships and not to use it on Kyro. That's the other easy way to get Kyro, is to spend your Get To on it. So if we farm the shock prods, the nice thing about that, Lightside 7B node also has materials for bronzium wiring for relics, and this has become one of the 3 premium nodes. You'll hear me talk throughout this holocron about premium nodes. And this Lightside 7B is definitely a premium node. It gets us the Kyro shock prods, which we need to farm a lot of anyway. Bronzium wiring materials out of the same thing, which are a problem. So we're actually going to actively farm the Kyro shock prod. We're going to intentionally leave that as a material that we're not going to get in the shop. We're going to get by farming, and we're going to get it by farming for a reason. All right, the next group of gear that I want to talk about is the 15 crystal cost gear pieces. Some gear pieces can be bought out of the shops for 15 crystals per fragment. If you look at the farming cost of farming each of those materials, you will find that by buying them out of the shop, you actually get more shards than you could by farming the nodes. Now, that said, it is a huge trade-off that you don't get all the rest of the node. So even though you might get more of that specific gear, you lose out on the credits, the shipbuilding materials, the other gear off those nodes. So that, in total, it's much less efficient to buy the piece of gear straight up. However, if you're already spending your first 3 refreshes wisely and using those to farm, then buying these gear pieces for crystals makes perfect sense, because you certainly couldn't efficiently do the 100 crystal refreshes, and you would have to do more refreshes somehow to get these gear pieces. So then buying them out of the shop becomes a very efficient proposal. So the 6 gear pieces that I'm aware of, maybe there's another one somewhere that I forgot, but these are the ones that I use and are familiar with. The Scener Mark III holo projectors, they cost $300 for a completed one. Sometimes you'll see them in the shop $600 for 2 completed, and of course they're 20 per completion, so that puts them at 15 crystals per shard. This is something that I very commonly buy out of the shop. Next, we see these Mark IX data pads. Now these, if you look at them, they're kind of black outline, let's say hollow looking, however you want to describe it. These pieces cost 15 per. There's another part looks just like this that's more of a filled in solid gold piece, and that you get enough of from the game that you never have to worry about. It shouldn't be a part that you ever have to farm or buy, but this part, this hollow looking part, you do have to buy, and that's another one that's a great value. And you can just buy these a 50 pack at a time for $750 if you need to for a completion. and it's good use of your currency. The Mark V med packs also same way, 15 crystals per shard, good investment. Mark V detonators, and then we have the Mark IV keypads. We talked about that before. Those are, of course, an early game menace. If you need them in the early game, you can purchase them out of the shop. Try to avoid that. Both of these pieces, try to avoid buying them just because over a long period of time you're going to get plenty. If you're short on them right now, you just have to wait. Over the course of weeks, you'll build them up in your account and you won't need to purchase them. But if it comes right down to it and you're doing your refreshes and you're farming wisely, these are efficient investments out of the shop. So in summary, we're going to buy the Mark III projectors to keep up with gearing requirements. We already need far more than the game is going to give us, and remember that's our preferred material for conversion on the Erodium heat sinks. So we will need quite a few of them for the Erodium heat sinks as well. There's not going to be enough extra gear overall. Now remember, we said that your stun guns, your Mark V droid callers, and even sometimes the Mark 8 bio will build up, and you can use those for Erodium heat sinks. But in my experience, and in the statistics that are shown in this method, even though we end up with some extra stun guns, it is not enough to make up the shortfall for everything that we need for heat sinks. So we have to throw in a lot of hollow projectors. We need almost over one hollow projector per week in total. So we need something like 130 hollow projectors on top of what we're going to get from the game itself. So it's quite a lot. You can farm some of them up, but you can also buy them out of the shop. Lightside 9F is a farm node that we're going to go to for the projectors. It also contains a lot of other good materials. We're going to be talking about this node a lot. It's got bayonets on it. It's got the solid version of the Mark 8 bio. It's got the hollow projectors, and it's even got more stuff on there for breaking down for relic materials. So it's one of the 3 premium nodes, and we're going to be able to get projectors from there as well. Okay, the Mark 4 and 8 bios, like we said, avoid those. The Mark 9 pads, Mark 5 dets, Mark 5 med packs, you can still buy those out of the shop. So Guild Store, for example, you can let your currency build up. You can try to keep a bank of those. But at some point, if one of your characters is just held up with these pieces and you don't want to try to purchase it out of the shop over a long timeline, you don't really want to farm it, you can just buy it straight out of the shop for crystals. It's very hard to predict when you're going to come short on these materials again, because you're getting every account's going to have different income based on the events. So buy them when you need them. Now we're going to start talking about the Gear 13 parts. Obviously, if we're going to relic all the requirements for 6 Galactic Legends and the Executor, that's going to be a lot of relic characters and a lot of high relic characters that we need to get. So to begin this discussion, we're going to divide up the Gear 13 into 4 different categories. Now, in the game, you'll sometimes hear this gear referred to as Gear 12, Gear 12 Plus. There's other parts where it's called Gear 13 or Gear 13 Plus. I'm going to try to stay consistent, if I can, with the Gear 13 concept, simply by saying this is the material that's required to take you from Gear 12 to Gear 13. So in my opinion, this is, the Gear 13 material. So we're going to divide that up into the injectors. Some people call them the finisher part. You need that on the lower right-hand corner for relicking. It's 50 fragments. There's an injector head, an injector handle, and an injector cell. They're each unique. But those are the only 3. And every character that needs a head, it's built in the same way. It's the same materials. Cell and handle are the same way. So there's basically 3 patterns that I repeat across all characters. We're going to talk about the left side gold parts, what are often called the Gear 13 parts. We're going to talk about the epic purple parts that are used throughout relics all across them. And then we're going to talk about the right side gold parts, which I refer to as the Gear 13 Plus. Again, I've heard them referred to as Gear 12 Plus. But they're different, and the Gear 13 parts on the left side are almost exclusively I believe they only come from regular energy farms, and on the right side, those pieces all come from fleet energy farms. So keep that in mind as we go along. And just to make it clear so that there's no mistakes, if you look at the character, when we talk about the left side, we're talking about what shows up on the left side of the character. Each one of those pieces has the same pattern. 30 of a gold part and 2 pieces of 20 each of these purple parts to make the combined piece. Okay, so each one of those 3 on the left-hand side, same structure, different parts, of course, but the same basic elements. On the right side, the top 2 parts are similar. They have a bunch of parts that you have to farm from fleet energy, and then the last part is a combination of one of the bottleneck gear pieces. In this case, you can see we've got the Mark IV back to gel that's needed, along with a bunch of the Mark VIII scanners. So those pieces can be difficult to bring together. And then at the bottom, you see the finisher piece where it's got the injector. It's got some other gear pieces. There's always either Kyros shock prods or Kyros computers. 2 of the formulas use the shock prods. 1 of the formulas use the computers. So that's why, in large part, you need a bunch more of the shock prods than you do of the computers, is because of these finishers. But these right side pieces that we farm out of fleet, this is what we're going to call the Gear 13 Plus pieces, just to be clear. So let's talk about the finisher first. We're going to need 1450 cells, 1250 handles, 1450 heads. Overall, you get almost enough to get by, and this is based largely on your ability to complete Challenge Tier 1 on assault battles across all of the assault battles. So it's a big assumption on my part that everybody's going to have an account where they can do Tier 1, Challenge Tier 1 on assault battles. And in addition to loot that you get from other places in the game, this is very close to being covered. So if you get short and you don't have enough, you're just going to have to use the energy and farm them over time. They are offered sometimes in the game in packs, but rarely are they offered in packs that have good efficiency in terms of either dollar value or crystal value, so be very careful. If you're trying to buy these out of the game, the efficiency isn't that good. Typically, just farm them if you don't have them. And if you're wondering why, especially if you're an early game player and you have none of these, well, the assault battles really are a large source for these materials, and until you get to Challenge Tier 1, you're definitely going to be lacking, and you're going to have to farm them. So now let's talk about the Gear 13 pieces. Now, I said we were going to talk separately about the Gear 13 and the purple pieces. In the end, we're actually going to kind of smash those together. Even though they're 2 separate things, we're going to try to combine them together and talk about them as kind of one topic, because we're going to acquire most of them in the same way. So if we just look at it, the med packs are by far the most in-demand material. We need 5,440 of the Mark VI med pack, the purple piece. We need 840 of the Mark VII detonators, 2520 of the syringes, and on and on. I won't go detailing all this gear out. The Gear 13 pieces on the left side cost 360 out of the shard shop, which is the exact same. You get 4 per piece, and it's the same as the Gear 13 pieces. So if we lump these together and we say, look, we're going to try to get all of this now, all of it that we can, out of the shard shop. They'll come from events, but not enough. With the gold pieces, again, just take a look. The med packs we need 1380 of. The multi-tool we need 1740. The armor we need 1350. So we need quite a lot of those. The cybernetics we need less of. The visor we need less of. But we're going to use the visor and the cybernetics to convert to relic materials to get those electrum conductors. So whenever you see these materials in the shard shop, we want to be purchasing these. And we'll talk about this more when we talk about the shops specifically. But you have to make 5 purchases per day or more out of the shard shop to make this work. So in total, if you total up all of these left side gear pieces plus all of the purple pieces needed everywhere in the category of Gear 13, That's 288 shards of these materials that you need per week. It includes the assumption that we're going to use these materials for electrium conductors, and that all relics are going to be made by crunching either the base materials or by completing pieces from this group. So events, surprisingly, the events overall are going to give you a lot of this stuff. And again, this is kind of average participation, but in a lot of these, you'll get some of these pieces out of almost all the different events that happen in the game. So you'll get almost up to 134 on average of something within this group, which is quite a lot. But that still leaves you needing a total of 154 per week from this group. 22 per day, and at 4 per purchase, that means 5.5 purchases from the shard shop in order to be fully resolved in these materials. Okay, now if we look at what I'm talking about with the shard shop, you can use either the base material like these cybernetics and get 15 each for each shard, or a completed cybernetics gets you 1050. Now, there's no advantage to completing it, so like with the scene or hollow projector, if you do the individual parts versus the completed parts, there's an advantage to completing the part before you send it to the scavenger. For this, there's no advantage. So if you look at it, each completed part has 30 gold pieces, and it has 20 times 2 of the purple pieces. It's total 70. You take that times 15, and you get 1,050. So one completed piece is worth exactly 15, but that does allow you to purchase. Remember, if we assume that we're going to see an even distribution in the shop, we're going to need a lot more of the med packs to go on characters. So that's going to let us buy an equal number of visors and other purple parts to make completed visors and turn those into electrium conductors. So by doing the completion, it allows you to consume those purple materials and get your electrium conductors at the right rate. If we don't do that and we're just always using the gold pieces, then we're going to have a problem acquiring the gold pieces at the appropriate rate for relicking characters. So we have to balance this all out so that we can do both, continue to relic characters as well as generate electrium conductors. Hope that all makes sense. Bayonets are on 9F. We've already identified that as a premium node. So I typically won't buy the bayonets specifically out of the shard shop because they are on a node that I'm farming, and I will typically be able to farm enough or have more than enough of those. And that allows me to conserve, again, for other pieces that I need more of. And it also helps me reduce the total number of pieces that I expect to buy out of the shop. Cybernetics are on dark side 9C. That's the third premium node. So the three that we've talked about, 7B light side, 9F light side, and 9C dark side, those are the three premium nodes. We're going to be farming dark side 9C a lot also. That'll give us the cybernetics. We can convert some of those cybernetics to completed pieces, etc. So this reduces, just with the bayonets and the cybernetics, if we never have to buy them out of the shard shop, that will already reduce the total burden to 18 shards per week, which is, it's still 5 purchases a day, but I mean, technically it's 4 purchases one day and 5 the next. So it does take a substantial amount of pressure off the shard shop if we're farming these two nodes. And again, guys, I'm just telling you how my system works. It's all part of a comprehensive system to get the right amount of gear over a long period of time. All right, whether you can successfully generate enough shard shop currency to sustain this rate is what determines your relic rate period. If you think to yourself, there is no way, no possible way that anybody could do 6 Galactic Legends and the Executor in 2.5 years, that's exactly what can be done. If you optimize your throughput on the shard shop, if you can keep up with these 5 purchases per day for your relic level, you can make it in that amount of time. If you can't, you won't, right? I can't tell you guys enough. We're going to cover this again later when we talk about shops, but the ability to sacrifice a bunch of progress on character stars and other things and just constantly shove that shard shop full of currency. That is the key to a fast relic rate. And if you can't do that, or you won't do that, or you're more of a casual player, it increases your timeline. It's not a bad thing. It just means that your timelines to relic the characters will be longer, and instead of taking 2.5 years, it may take 3 years or longer. It's not a bad thing, okay? But this shard shop currency is absolutely the key. We're going to feed it 3 a day out of the Galactic War Store. We're going to rarely use it for anything but just, get your 1,200 currency from the Galactic War Store, purchase 3 ships that you already have 7 stars on, jam it into the shard shop. 1 or 2 per day purchases from the Cantina store. Bronzium, events that get your characters over 7 stars. All that stuff's got to go to the shard shop. We're even going to take a look at ship nodes that have characters on them. When you're farming a ship, it takes twice as long as it takes the character. So if there's a character on your ship node, then you can constantly generate shard shop currency while you're finishing out the farm on your ship. I've seen a lot of people stop a ship at 6 stars. They're farming a character and a ship together. They get the character. The ship is just over 5 stars. They make the commitment to finish it out to 6, and they still need 100 shards on the ship, and they give up. And they're like, well, I don't want to farm that node anymore. I've already got the character, and they stop. When actually continuing to farm that node, generating character shards, jamming them into the shard store, it's the way to go. Even to the extent that I will, from time to time, go down to like 3F in the Cantina. I wrote 3C here, but that's actually 3F in the Cantina. That's the Kylo Ren unmasked node. It's got him and also the TIE silencer. And early game, it's a nice trick. You can just go down there, jam a whole bunch of Cantina currency into the 3F node, feed the shard shop with both Kylo and his ship. Meanwhile, you generate more currency for the Cantina store to feed more stuff to the shard shop. Go, go, go. For the first 6 months or so, when you don't have a lot of 7-star characters, the rate is difficult to attain. Cassian's U-Wing is a huge benefit. It's the most efficient conversion. For anybody who doesn't know, we'll talk more about this later, but the Cassian's U-Wing is the most efficient conversion in the game. You have to buy it. If you want full efficiency on your account conversions, you just have to get this to 7 stars and use it as your Cantina currency to shard shop currency conversion. Have to. Gotta bite the bullet. Cantina refreshes accelerate characters and signal data. They also allow more conversion of the U-Wing. They're a strong feeder of the shard shop. I've said before that the difference between you going slow and going fast in the very early game is really based on how many Cantina refreshes. For anybody who watched my Darth Loquitur account series, I started out the account spending $20 a month, and it was literally, I told everybody, those 2,800 crystals are going to be 28 Cantina refreshes, point blank. That's it. That's what they're for. That's all I did with it. I just did the Cantina refreshes to accelerate all this stuff. All right, if we look at the Gear 13 Plus pieces now, we're over on the right-hand side with the fleet energy materials that we have to farm. 4150 on the furnaces, 3150 on the HoloLenses, 2250 data pads, stun cuffs, implants, etc. I calculate that you're going to need 19,600 for all of the Gear 13 parts. This does not include yet the conversion to Zinbittle cards. So let's talk about this first, and then we'll get into the Zinbittle card discussion later. So for these, you need about 156 per week. You receive approximately 57 per week from events in this category, which leaves you more or less with 100 per week that you have to acquire. Purchasing from shops in this category is really inefficient. Conquest is really good. I will say that right now that buying these materials from the Conquest store is the single most efficient use of the Conquest. And in fact, this is, if you can, these Gear 13 materials are all you should ever spend your Conquest currency on. So I feel very strongly about that. The math shows that that's the case. I won't go into it here, but that's a way to supplement it. you have to spend roughly 500 energy per day farming fleet nodes, and that gets you about 84 per day for the week. Statistically, that's close to requirements. We're looking for 100 per day. We're getting 84 per day, so it's close. Conquest, even with moderate success, you can get those other 16 per day potentially out of that shop. Now, when I go through this, and I've analyzed it several times, guys, and I feel like I'm missing some income here. So this is not a problem for me to generate plenty of these Gear 13 materials. I do have to use pretty much all of my fleet energy with 3 refreshes every day, and not farming too many hard nodes in fleet to make this all come together. But it's not a problem. So I think there's an issue somewhere with my math. I think that maybe I underestimated some of the event income or something. But that's what my numbers showed when I did the math. But really, if we need 100 a week, we're making 100 a week, because it's not a problem for me as it plays out actually in the game. So I feel like there's a math error there, even though it doesn't add up. It seems to work out fine on both my accounts that are running like this. Now, in addition to that, we also need about 2,200 pieces in total that we have to crunch up to convert to something like 440 Zinbittle cards that we need in total for all of these characters. So the HoloLenses are really the best conversion to make the Zinbittle cards out of. And really, all this means is that when you're taking things to the highest relic levels, it may just slow down your progress a little bit, right? So if your progress is relicking one character every 11 days, which should be possible, then maybe when you're taking things to high relic levels that need Zinbittle cards, that relic cycle becomes more like 14 days, which also gives you a little more time to farm things out of the shard shop for other Gear 13 characters, etc. So it does, again, I didn't get this detailed in the way that I would have liked, but again, I'm not having a problem with it on either of my accounts. So I do feel like there's more income here than I'm giving it credit for. And if there's not, it just means that the timeline is a little longer, and maybe we can't meet that 2.5 years. Maybe it looks more like, an extra month or two just for these extra high-level Gear 13 materials. But it's close. I mean, it should be on track, should be on target. If you can't maintain the timeline for the Gear 13 items, it could very well be your own event participation. I've noticed that sometimes I get busy at work. I really don't have time to get in there and swing at the raids. And then I'll get a couple 36th places instead of getting like somewhere in the top 20. And you can see it right away. It really affects your gear income if you're not at least getting in the raids and taking a swing. A lot of people just don't even put up a number. So a lot of times I showed this with one of my accounts when I was in a guild, and they were doing Heroic Sith raid, and 2 or 3 guys were soloing the raid, and everybody else would just sit idle. I got in there one time and did like 12,000 damage, and I was 4th place. So you got to get in there and swing. Just get in there and do something, and it'll improve your placement enough. It'll be noticeable in the gear that you get rewarded. Especially in the Sith raid, you've got to try to get above the H104 box or higher. So I think that's 20th place or higher that you need to get in the Heroic Sith raid. So basically you have to be in the top half of your guild. You have to try. And because a lot of people don't even, like I said, don't even participate in the raids, it's not that hard to get a top 20 placement if you get in there and swing on it. You can also just decrease your fleet farms if you're trying to do 3 or 4 different ships and Shock T and Enfys Nest and all that stuff all at once. It definitely is going to decrease the amount of farm that you're focusing on these pieces, and you won't be able to maintain the rate. If your playstyle is casual, resulting in lower gear, like I said before, it just increases the timeline. I estimated, did another estimate based on casual play for these Gear 13 parts, and I said, okay, well, how would that look? And basically it's extended the time from 125 weeks up to 156 weeks total,
And it was surprising. It takes 3 years instead of 2.5. And on a very long timeline, those 6 months, really, you can lay off this method quite a bit and be a lot more casual about it. And it really doesn't take that much longer. It kind of surprised me that it didn't extend it out to, like, let's say 4 years or something. But yeah, so a little bit does decrease the timeline, but it's okay. It's not too bad. Summary of all the Gear 13 stuff. Gear 13 is driven by 2 farm nodes and a ton of shop purchases, right? The 2 farm nodes that we're talking about are the Cybernetic node and the Bayonet node. We're going to farm the heck out of those and make just a ton of shard shop purchases. The Gear 13 Plus stuff is going to consume almost all of our daily fleet energy and leave us enough to farm 2 hard nodes with an average, as long as we're doing our 3 refreshes. Okay, we got to get our free energy once a day. We've got to get all of the energy, all 240 energy that gets generated, plus 3 refreshes, and we can farm 2 hard nodes pretty easily and still have enough to make this method work. We need active participation in all raids and games and modes to achieve the average level of gear acquisition. Now, I didn't put this in as like a bunch of first places and really high placements in the raids. I don't think that's fair. But I think saying we're getting top 20 and making that the loot estimate is indeed fair. But if you're placing below that, then you'll be below the average estimate for this method. All right, let's talk about the guild store. In the guild store, there's these completed parts. And I think a lot of people really underestimate what you can get by buying these completed parts. If you look at that Mark 7 Blast weapon mod, it has, I don't remember the exact count, but it's got several different pieces, and those pieces are made up of 5 pieces each of something, and it represents something like 14 different pieces of gear. If you buy this Blast weapon mod completed, all of the gear that you save that you don't have to combine then becomes stuff that you can scrap for carbonite circuit boards or bronzium wiring. Smeanwhile, this is one of the pieces that converts directly to chromium transistors at an incredibly high rate in the scavenger. So I think it's 200 for 5 of these, or maybe 150. But the cost of these out of the guild store is ridiculously low. So when we build up a bank in the guild store, we are going to be keeping our eyes out for these completed parts. Over here on the right, you'll see a Mark III detonator. Now, if you look at the top, that is a Mark III detonator part. You need 5 of those to complete a Mark III detonator. The bottom is a completed Mark III detonator, and you can purchase 5 of these at a time, I think for 200 out of the guild store. Now, that represents 25 Mark III detonators, and it's one of the most insanely good values in the game. You should buy these Mark III detonators literally every time they show up. Some of the high-level gear pieces consume multiple pieces that need a detonator, and then the next level is multiple pieces of that piece. And at the highest level, you need 8 completed detonators, 40 total Mark III detonators for 1 gear piece. So if you buy these out of the shop, 2 purchases gets you 10. That gets you a gear completion with some to spare. If you have to farm these, you have to really farm a lot of them to get 40 of them off a node, and it's probably a node that you don't really want to farm anyway. The Range Trooper node, for example, has these parts on it, and whenever I needed them, I was farming it off the Range Trooper node. But eventually I got to the point where I was always saving enough currency and buying these completed parts out of the guild store. There's no reason to ever need to farm them. Now, that doesn't mean that everything is a good deal out of there, so you do have to be careful. So buying the completed pieces, fantastic bargain. We save a lot of the lower-level materials for other stuff. All right, so I suggest a bank of at least 30 of the completed detonators. This is an example of a part that's not a good deal. If you look at this Mark III droid collar, it is simply 5 pieces of droid collar. And if you look at your inventory, you'll have like 480 of these things. There's no reason to make that purchase. right? So you don't want to purchase the stuff that you already have tons of in your inventory. When I looked in the course of this video, I had 385 of them in my inventory. So I don't need to buy a completed part where I already have enough of these to make as many of them as I want. So my suggestion is, look for those completed parts, but do familiarize yourself with them, click on them, make sure that they're a good part that has multiple other components that you really want to buy, and then build up a bank of about 20, maybe 30 or more on the detonators if you can. And that'll really help you as you progress any characters through the low gear tiers. It'll consume those completed materials, and it'll leave a whole bunch of the incomplete materials, and that will help you with your relic material development a lot more than you think. All right. Miscellaneous relevant parts. We talked about this Mark IV back to gel. That's definitely a part that you will need. We're farming it off of one of our premium nodes, so we've got that problem solved, okay? Mark 8 binoculars we'll need. The Mark 8 solid piece. Now this used to never be a problem. The hollow piece was an issue. That hollow piece is now in the daily challenges. When you combine these pieces, it uses 50 of the hollow piece to 60 of these completed or full looking pieces. I can't remember the exact name of each one. But this comes off of our 9C node or our 9F node that we're going to farm anyway. But you will end up falling behind on this filled in piece. It used to never be a problem. And now, just because of the way the game is structured and the way the materials are consumed, you actually get more of those hollow looking pieces. So it's weird. But you do occasionally have to solve this problem. The Mark 7 shield generator, the Mark II back to gel, and then I put the Mark II HoloLens in here, but that represents, also Mark III weapon mods. A bunch of little low-level green stuff can be in this category. So the Mark IV back to gel, we're going to go to our premium node for that, the Darkside 9C. We're going to farm it off of there. For the Mark 8 binoculars, there's two nodes. One of them is the hard node with Nihilus on it. It's a good node. You can farm that node. And especially if you've already got Nihilus completed, you can get extra character shards for him that way. Or if you don't have Nihilus completed, it helps you work toward completion of the Nihilus character. And then the normal node can be farmed if you're desperate. But occasionally these can pop up as a problem. It seems to me like I'll have like 36 out of 50, and I'll just need to go in there and farm up the last 14. And then by the time I really need it on another character, I'll be, again, I'll have some, but not enough. So farm those as needed. The Mark 8 Biosalvage, Lightside 9F premium node. The Mark 7 shield generator, we can go to Lightside 9A. That also has Mark 12 armor on it. That armor can be converted to relic materials. We're always looking to farm stuff off of a node that also has relic materials whenever we can. It serves a twofold purpose. It gives us more of those relic materials. If we don't actually use them for relicing a character, we can use them for making materials for the relic process. So that's an example where we can overlap that. Mark II back to gel now shows up in the Squad Arena store, Mark I and Mark II back to gel. So buying that out of the Squad Arena store makes it so that you don't have to farm this crazy stuff. And low-level characters, they'll use this stuff up out of the blue, like 5 at a time. It'll just all disappear on you, and you'll have characters waiting on this Mark II back to gel. So it's pretty crazy. Now, for all the miscellaneous small pieces like the Mark II HoloLens, again, it's so random. I don't know how I can possibly calculate when you'll run out of Mark III weapon mods. Maybe you'll use them in a combine for Mark 7 weapon mods in order to get materials for the scavenger. Then you'll be out of the Mark III weapon mods to put on characters. So there will be times where you just have to farm them. The other thing that you can do, you can make a guild request for them. I typically, if I need Mark II HoloLenses, for example, I'll just throw that up a couple times in the guild request. The guild mates help me out. They give me 10 of them. Next day I ask again, I get 10 more of them. 20 of them probably breaks whatever bottleneck I have on these. And then I never have to spend my energy on farming them. And if I don't have to farm them, I can stay focused on my hard nodes and the premium nodes and generating that gear to break the bottlenecks. Okay, so farm is needed. If you have a choice like on these, maybe they show up on like a 6 energy node or something like that, and it's very tempting to go into that 6 energy node and just get a bunch of them all at once. But again, if that material shows up on a higher node with injector handles or gear 13 pieces, you really need to farm those higher nodes, get the gear 13 pieces along with your other little bottleneck breakers. Sometimes that'll be a hard node. And there's a lot of hard nodes now that contain a character and a ship or 2 characters. And a lot of times if you've got 1 or more of those characters farmed, it's a great deal. You farm the hard node, you get these little materials that you need, and you also get other materials you need and also shards for the shard shop. So really, whenever you need to farm these little pieces, look as far as you can to the right in your options and try to find, a 9 node if possible, an 8 node, a 7 node with other good stuff on it. But the higher level nodes that you can farm, the more credits you're going to get, the more other gear you're going to get, and especially if it's Relic Gear 13 materials, that's what you need. Double it up. If you really need to speed up the process and you just want to hit the low nodes, that's up to you. I'm telling you it's not efficient, but you can do it if you really need to. So we talked through a bunch of different gear, and I don't know if people want to see every single piece of gear in the entire game, but I think at some point there's got to be a limit to it. So there's a lot more gear. Mark IV droid collars we didn't cover, Mark VI droid collars, Mark VII, Mark VI bio, just whatever. Like there's so much stuff in the game that we haven't talked about. So just suffice to say, tons of that material, you're already going to get enough in the game that it's never going to be a problem for you. Other pieces, if they show up, most likely you can solve the problem out of the guild store with just a little bit of patience and waiting for those materials to show up in the guild store. If they're not showing up in the guild store to your satisfaction and they aren't on my list, simply farm them. Just do what you need to, farm them up, get them out of the way. I think this guide has covered all the relevant pieces of material that you can buy with crystals, farm, etc. But it's hard for me to tell for every single account in the world what you're going to run out of. So if it's not on the list and you're out of it, just figure it out, buy it out of a shop, farm it. All right, moving on to relic scraps. We've talked a bit about this as we go along, but I want to bring this to a point and talk about every single relic scrap and how we're going to get them with this method. The assumptions have been built in. This whole method is considered to be free to play. We're not accelerating spending. We're not doing accelerated cantina refreshes. We're making some assumptions about fleet placement and how you're getting your crystals to do basic refreshes on fleet energy and regular energy every day, and only 3 cantina refreshes a week. So the assumptions are you're not going to go out and buy additional materials for relicking. All of these materials are going to be made by scrapping stuff that you've gotten from the game. All right. People may have their own method. I'm aware that people who spend money can often solve problems with relic materials pretty easily. Okay, if you've got great ideas, if there's something that you see that I'm not doing, that you've got ideas, I would love to see it in the comments down below. Hit us with a comment, start the conversation. I can't say that I've got everything figured out 100%, so if you've got good ideas, bring them on in. We'll be happy. Happy to hear them. Starting out with the carbonite circuit boards, based on the mid-game nature of this guide, accounts will be farming hard nodes. You're going to still need ships. You're going to still need characters. A lot of those hard nodes contain the really low-level materials that you need for carbonite circuit boards. So if you're not farming hard nodes to get those characters, you may actually have to pay specific attention to carbonite circuit boards. Otherwise, you'll be getting this material at some rate. There's also a purchase spot now for 150 in the squad arena store, and that can be either materials that break down for carbonite circuit boards or for bronzium wiring. On my main account, I'm spending 150 on that almost every single time it shows up, and it's helped me a lot especially with the carbonite circuit boards and bronzium wiring. Bronzium wiring is what I have the hardest time keeping up with. So anytime I see stuff in there that I need, I can buy it out of the Squad Arena store to help. The light side normal nodes on 1C, 1E, and 1F, they all provide very high drop rates of stuff that's just, it's all carbonite circuit board scrap materials. Some people like 1C. It does show a material that shows up there 2 at a time, but that 2 at a time material does have a 50% drop rate. So 1C, 1E, and 1F are all roughly equivalent. If there's a particular piece on there that you feel like you actually need for characters, you can farm it. I have had in my time, I have before had to go to those nodes and spend like 2 days, just blitz a whole bunch of energy into that node and get some carbonite circuits. Again, it might delay my farms by 2 days, but I can generate quite a few circuit boards in a couple days on these nodes. So if needed, there is a solution, an easy solution. Bronzium wiring is by far the most challenging material for me. I don't know if it's just the nature of my nodes or my system or whatever, but I always end up with bronzium wiring being the material. It's even to the extent I would say I generate the higher level stuff, the electrium conductors, even the Zimbital cards, I can generate them at the rate I need them, and I can't keep up on bronzium wiring. So I rely very heavily on farming Kyros shock prods, the light side 7B node. It has Mark V data pads that give the highest exchange rate for bronzium wiring. It also has Mark V keypads that have a low exchange rate but still can be used for bronzium wiring. So by farming almost all of my Kyros shock prods on that node, that's what's feeding my bronzium wiring, and I can almost keep up. But I do still have to make quite a lot of guild requests. I just ask for materials out of bronzium wiring selection, change them up each day, and just keep asking the guild over and over for these like green materials. But they're green materials that break down for bronzium wiring. So a lot of times people are willing to donate those, and you always get your request filled by the guild. So it's a nice way to supplement your bronzium wiring. The Mark IV bio implants from one of our other premium nodes, the Darkside 9C, where we're getting our cybernetics, they also go to bronzium wiring. So again, you see the synergy with these premium nodes. When I'm talking about these 3 nodes that I farm all the time, they really do balance out specifically the relic materials in a good way. Chromium transistors. This holocron is made after they've implemented the crafting feature in the scavenger. So you can just go into any of the Mark VII blue pieces. They give a high exchange rate. The Mark VII weapon mod is really the premium one. The Mark VII ball armor is okay, but it requires 2, I think like Mark II stun cuffs or maybe Mark I stun cuffs or something like that. But you actually have to farm a specific green material to feed the ball armor, so it's not that great. There's a Mark VII data pad in there that's pretty efficient, and then there's a Mark VII Larinar piece that's it's less efficient. It uses up some materials that you don't really want to throw away, but if that's what's needed, you can do that. Mostly the Mark VII weapon mod is really the easiest one to farm up and combine and get that good exchange rate. Several of these pieces can be farmed, purchased directly from the shop. Again, the completed pieces from the guild store. So Mark VII weapon mod, just buy them up. Buy them up and every time you see them, and just smash them up into transistors. This material in specific should never be an issue. I get so much of the stuff at the 300 exchange rate that I rarely even look at the stuff at a low exchange rate. Somebody asked me about it recently. I looked back. I had like 1,400 of a bunch of stuff that was at the low exchange rate. So then I could convert that stuff to chromium transistors as well. But this material just isn't hard. Shouldn't be hard for you. So stun guns and Mark 8 bio components, Mark 5 droid collars, let them build up. I like to have a big bank of these things. I don't like to suddenly find myself without them, so I typically like to keep 300 of them in inventory. So if they get up to 400, I'll scrap out 100 of them and convert them to heat sinks. Some other people are more confident, taking them down to even 50. Well, if I need 50, I'll have them. And if I need 50 after that, I'll just wait and they'll come to me and it'll be fine. That's a way to play. I mean, you can do it either way. You can use what you need to use today to get the heat sinks and then just wait on gearing your characters until they show back up. Or you can keep a bank and make sure you have some flexibility. Either way is fine. But suffice to say, those materials you should get enough of that eventually you can break some of them down. Use only completed Mark III hollow projectors to make up the rest. If you use just the base pieces, you get a bad exchange rate. Once you combine them, you get a good exchange rate. And remember, we can buy them for 300 crystals from the shop, or they come from our 9F Lightside Premium node, so that we'll get plenty of those over time. Electrium Conductor. We've got the Mark 12 visor, cybernetics, and armor that are all good for the exchange here. We try to do completed pieces when possible. Used to be that you had to have a character with that particular piece on it. It's such a relief now that you can just go in and combine them right in the tool. So that's awesome. So let's use completed pieces when possible. Again, that's to pull from our pool of purple pieces and optimize the efficiency so that we're not stuck farming a bunch of gold gear because we crunched it up a single piece at a time. The main source for me still is really the Dark Side 9C, farm the cybernetics, combine them with the detonators, the purple detonators, and get a good exchange rate. I can farm those faster than I can get the purple part to combine them. So I do some combined, and I also do some uncombined. But we're getting a bunch of them, so we can do that with that particular piece. Zinbittle cards, keypads and detonators, Mark 12. There may be a time where you come in here and you feel like you have extras of those. I feel like all of those extras are going to be used on a character sooner or later, so I have a hard time committing to crunch those up. So I use almost exclusively the HoloLenses because when I want them, I farm them up, and they come off of a node that has Mark 6 syringes. And if you remember, I always have problems with bronzium wiring, and the syringes, they don't have a great exchange rate, but if I get too many of them, I can still turn them into bronzium wiring. So that node for me, because I have a bronzium wiring part on it, becomes my preferred node. I farm 3C fleet to get those lenses and also the syringes. For the impulse detectors, for those Gear 8 character or Relic 8 characters that you need these impulse detectors. I convert almost exclusively the bayonets. Again, Lightside 9F premium node, get the bayonets, convert them over here. The exchange rate on this, I feel like, is horrible. You really have to farm a lot of the bayonets to convert to impulse detectors. Assuming that you get into a guild eventually that can do CPIT, you'll have far more of the finisher part there, the avocados or whatever you want to call them, and you'll have to get these impulse detectors. So for me, it means really a lot of those bayonets. But since that node is also giving us the Mark 8 bio, the Mark 3 projectors, it's literally one of the best nodes overall for this whole strategy. And we farm it probably at least 50% or more of all of our farming energy that we spend on nodes is going into that. The gear to keypads for Relic 9, there's no, I accidentally typed gear 9. There's no R9. There's no R9 requirements in the first 6 GLs or in the Executor Journey. So we don't typically, let's say we don't have to do this, but if you do need the gear to keypads, the furnace node is the best node to farm. So if you can farm that up. The stun guns, I think you'll actually have extras of from the game, so you'll have some of those that you can convert. But if you have to farm it, farm the furnace. All right, so that's pretty much all of the gear, all of the relic materials discussed. Some adjustments for later game players. So if you've completed the Negotiator and the Malevolence, and let's say if you're going to do Rebel Officer Leia Organa, again, that's required for all 6 Galactic Legends. You need it for JML, so you'll have to buy it. But once you have that get to under control, then you do have the Get To available to use on gear. I do suggest then that you convert your purchase of Kyros computers over to the Get To store, and that'll free you up to be able to use your GAC currency on other gear, or if you love mods as much as I do, then you just convert it over to buying slicing materials instead of the Kyros. And again, it's not that I get that Get To available and that you should buy the shock prods, because remember, if you start buying all your shock prods that way, you're really going to fall behind even further in the bronzium wiring. That shock prod node is such a key element to getting your bronzium wiring done that without it, it's not going to work. So I still say buy mostly computers. You can buy some shock prods, but farm your shock prods. All right. With a highly developed account, there may come a point where you're not really looking at hard nodes. And again, hard nodes are the main source of materials that we're getting for the carbonite circuit boards and bronzium wiring. So if we're not farming hard nodes, it's likely that a lot of these lower materials are going to have to be farmed directly, which could be inefficient. You can use the premium hard nodes to feed the scavengers. So basically what I'm saying is, if you're not farming any hard nodes at all, let's say you're a late game player and right now Iden Versio and Mara Jade are the only two hard nodes in the game that you really want to farm. Okay, that could be the case, right? So instead of farming a whole bunch more shock prods or farming a whole bunch more of the back to gels or whatever, we can actually go into some of the premium hard nodes. Okay. I think I missed a slide somewhere in here. But what you're looking for is character nodes that have two characters, like the one with Hero Finn. There's two characters on that node, plus Carbantes, I believe. There's the Hyena Bomber node has the Hyena Bomber and also the Jedi Consular's Starfighter, so it's got two ships on it. It also has stun cuffs, I believe, and also some low-level materials for bronzium wiring and such. So if you look, Jango Fett's node is another one. It's got Jango Fett, Bosk's Houndstooth ship on that node. Again, stun cuffs, I believe, and some other materials. So it's possible to rotate in some hard node farming. And again, at some point they did say they were going to increase the gear drop rate from hard nodes. And if they increase the drop rate from hard nodes for gear, then I think those nodes that I mentioned really do become nodes that you should farm every day as part of your farming routine if you don't have other hard nodes. So Hero Finn, Jango Fett's node, and the one with two ships with the Hyena Bomber and Jedi Consular. I think doubling the gear off of those nodes makes them better than almost any regular node that you could farm. Because remember, you're going to get Carbantes or stun cuffs or whatever you're farming on that node. You're going to get character shards, ship shards, feed the shard shop, buy more Gear 13 materials, and just pump this cycle faster and faster and faster. So consider that. If you're a late game player, look at the potential on farming a couple other hard nodes instead of just converting all your farm to normal nodes. And then instead of skipping around to a bunch of different normal nodes, you can work on that. I have seen what I would call uber hoarding. Some late game players, I've seen 50,000 currency and higher, Galactic War Store, Arena Store. I saw a snapshot of a guy with something like 1.4 million currency in the shard shop. And I immediately think to myself, how many purchases is that? How many, pieces could I make? And that's like, 4,000 electrum conductors or something ridiculous. Like, just the amount of in-game progress that could have been made with these currencies is crazy. So I think it's ridiculous. Put your currency to work. Convert shard shop stuff to materials. Make relic materials. Put them in the bank if you need to. It's up to each player what to do, but man, building a bank. I've seen also, like with Get 2, people have maybe 70,000 Guild Event Token 2 stored up. And they say, well, they may bring another premium capital ship to the game for Get 2. They might bring another character over there. Or they have, a ridiculous amount of the Guild Event Token 1. And they say, well, Malik and Gas are in there, and they require Get 1. So maybe there'll be more characters that have to be finished with Get 1. And what I would say to that is, when that happens, I'll put my Get 1 toward that character. But in the meantime, that 70,000 currency in the bank could have been how much other stuff. So think about your hoarding. If you're a hoarder, I think it's better to put your money to work. And then if something does happen in the game later, you won't be the first one to have it, but who cares? You'll have something else the whole time that you're waiting. All right, let's talk about spending. And this is a cautionary tale, and I'm going to tell people to just be very careful with spending. Once we have this optimized strategy, if you then look at it and you say, okay, 2.5 years, I want to do it in 1.5 years. I want to do it in 2 years. What can I do? What can I buy that by buying that accelerates everything? So here's what I'm going to say. It's a very slippery slope. So we talked about Carbantes, and basically your account develops at the rate which you can acquire and install the Carbantes. And you just get sick of it. And you say, okay, I'm going to spend $100 and I'm going to blow it on Carbantes, and I'm just going to get progress on all these characters that are waiting on Carbantes. So let's see what happens. Buy 10 Carbantes, 1,400 crystals each. If you buy $100 worth of crystals, 14,000 crystals, no problem. You buy 10 Carbantes. You may have to wait a while for that many to show up in the shop, but you get the point. It normally would take you about 3 weeks to build 10 Carbantes. You get over 1 Carbante a week just from the challenges. You get materials out of events for almost a second Carbante every week. And if you make some purchases out of the shop, you can easily have your third Carbante. So let's say it represents about 3 weeks worth of work to get 10 Carbantes. So you're now 3 weeks ahead in your timeline. The problem with that is if you look at it as an overall strategy, with the combination of all the loot and purchases from all the stuff that we do, are you 3 weeks ahead? Or is it just now that you're 3 weeks also, you used up 3 weeks worth of signal data, 3 weeks worth of relic materials, 3 weeks worth of Gear 13 pieces that you've purchased out of the shard shop? Remember, we're trying to make 5 purchases a day to make this work. That's 35 purchases a week. That represents 105 purchases out of the shard shop that we're now ahead on Carbantes. So that's what I say when I mean it's a slippery slope. Once you start accelerating in one specific area of the game, all of these other areas of the game can't keep up either. And then, do you have the temptation at that point to start spending more money? Well, now I'm waiting on something else. I got those Carbantes out of the way. Now I'm waiting on signal data. I just need some signal data to relic this character, so I'll buy some signal data. And then once you buy the signal data, you don't have another Gear 12 character ready to go to relic, so now you got to spend money on whatever piece they need. And very quickly you can get yourself wrapped up in this way of spending money that is really, really inefficient. So be careful. Cautionary tale on spending. If you do want to spend and you want to get ahead, I advocate using a very patient strategy. You buy crystals, use those crystals, and make sure that those 6 pieces of gear that I talked to you about earlier are never a problem, right? The holo projectors, buy them out of the shop. The Mark V detonators, the Mark 9 data pads, get all that stuff for 15 crystals, buy those out of the shop as you need them, build up a bank, use those crystals to buy that. Use it for Cantina refreshes. Again, we get a huge snowball off the Cantina refreshes. Puts us ahead on signal data or builds characters faster. It could be used on a Cantina node to feed the shard shop. Once you use that Cantina energy, you generate Cantina currency that can also be converted to characters to feed the shard shop. So if you got 3 refreshes every day, 21 a week instead of 3, for that period of time, you accelerate the shard shop, which is what you need to accelerate for this whole method to work faster, right? We said way back when we talked about the shard shop and whether or not you could get these 5 purchases a day determines your pace. If you outpace that part of the system, you can outpace the whole system. So it's better to spend your money on crystals, use those crystals to buy the 15 crystal cost gear pieces, and use it for cantina refreshes, and just accelerate everything. Okay? That's the right way to spend money, and it won't outrun your system, because at some point, if you're outrunning the whole rest of your system with this stuff, then you can always just pull it back and use that cantina energy then to farm a character to get ahead on your next character journey or something like that. So it's a very efficient way to convert money into speed. But it takes patience, it takes time. You can't spend your money all in one day. You spend $100 worth of crystals, it might take you 2 or 3 weeks to work it efficiently into game progress. All right. You can also make wise purchases out of the shop. There's this purchase that comes up sometimes where you can spend 500 crystals and get a random amount of carbonite circuit boards. You really get a good amount of carbonite circuit boards, and if you calculate out what you would have to farm to get the same amount of circuit boards, it's an incredible value. The bronzium wiring isn't bad. The 500 crystals for bronzium wiring, it's okay. But for sure, the carbonite circuit board one is great, and if that's where you're short, it helps you catch up there in a hurry. If you truly have extra crystals, I really think that buying the ships, the capital ships, Finalizer or Radis for the respective journeys for SLKR or Ray, or buying the Executor, the amount of time that you can buy, maybe you could unlock the ship at 4 stars and then use crystals to get it to 7 right away, versus waiting 2 years worth of events to actually get it to 7 stars someday. Those crystal purchases are incredibly efficient because you can start doing work with that character or that ship right away. And the whole time that you have it, it's paying itself back. So those to me are the best direct purchases. Purchasing character shards for crystals, to me, is always a horrible value. My own story on spending, on my main account, I spend $100 a month, and I run my Darth Loquitur account, and for months now I've been more or less free to play. I have invested in the Conquest Game Pass a couple times just to test that out, but more or less I haven't spent money on crystals in months. And I am shocked. The progress on my $100 a month account is almost identical. And that's when I started realizing just the nature of the strategy that I use. You really don't get that much further ahead with the $100 unless you spend it on that cantina currency and get that curve going that way. So that's what I do. And with the rest of it, I've actually started overspending on extra mod refreshes because at least with the mods now I'm getting more mods, and I feel like I can get ahead on mods compared to anybody who's only spending 3 refreshes. I spend 6, and that must make me going twice as fast on mods. So oddly enough, when I'm spending the $100 on my main account, it's just cantina refreshes now and extra mod refreshes. I'm rarely spending it on anything else. So that's my story. That really, I've learned a lot from that. So now, take a pause, intermission, pause the video here, go to the restroom, come back, whatever you need to do. I'm going to retell this story shop by shop. So we talked about the gear, we talked about the relic materials, and now we're going to break it down to the level where I'm going to tell you every single shop by shop, what to look for every day. Tie the strategy all together. In the shipments, the one that shows the little credit sign, there's 4 pieces that show up there that you can buy 4 credits. I always buy them. Be aware they did change the shop recently. There's a bunch of crystal stuff now at the top, and a lot of people got caught by that and spent a whole lot of crystals on stuff they didn't want. Be very careful when you click through the shop. Buy the stuff for credits only. That's what we want out of here. just be aware there's a quest daily that says make 3 purchases out of the shop. We're always going to be able to complete that quest no matter what, because they're going to give us 4 every time a shop shows up, and we'll be able to buy and make our purchases. In the Cantina store, once your account is developed, you're pretty much going to just buy Cassian's U-Wing over and over again and feed the shard shop. In most areas of the game, when you make a 400 currency purchase for ships, you get 4 shards, converts to 152 shards in the shard shop. A character you get 10 of, converts to 150. So ships are, let's say, 2 better than characters on a normal, which makes them pretty much the same. But here with Cassian's U-Wing, for no reason whatsoever, we get 5 shards instead of 4. So that takes it from a 2 shard advantage to a 40 shard advantage. And there's nowhere else in the game where you can just get an extra 40 currency in the shard shop. So Cassian's U-Wing out of the Cantina store, most efficient conversion to feed the shard shop. So we're going to buy this over and over again. In this shop, I don't feel there's any need to bank, don't build up 3,000 or whatever. Maybe in the early game you want to do that, but now even in the early game, you know what characters you want to buy. You're either going to buy a character, or you're going to buy a ship, or you're going to convert shard shop currency, and that's it. No reason to have a bank. The guild store. This is, to me, the second most important store in the game to make this method work. The first most important store, of course, is going to be that shard shop. How you use the shard shop determines everything about our method. The guild store is the second most because you're going to use this to fill in all the gaps. If you need extra, Mark 4 droid callers, if you need Mark 9 bio, whatever it is that you need, you're gonna fill all this stuff in where possible from the guild store. So this is kind of your catch-all. We do want to build up quite a big bank of materials here if we can, and we're going to use this to get a lot of the gear we need, and we're going to establish kind of a warehouse approach. So if I go in and I look at this Mark 6 droid caller, I have 79 of them. I would love to have at least 50, so I'm okay, but I've only got 1,291 currency. I'm well below my banked amount, right? So even though I want to build this up to 100, I don't have enough in my bank. I've go over 50, I'm going to leave it alone. Now, if this was 29, I might still spend the 760 and go ahead, even though I don't have the bank built up, because I know I got to get that material back to 50. If I ever need it, I'm going to need 50 of it somewhere, so we got to build the bank back up. In the top 2 rows in the store, use that approach. 50 or more, or 100 more once you've got a bank. The Mark 7 scanners, according to my calculations, these things are going to be a menace for every account to keep up with, because you got to buy them out of here, and you can't get them except for in raids. You can't farm them, right? So we got to buy them or get them from events. So we're really going to use the scanners. We're going to always try to have 100 or more of the scanners. If we use them up, we're always going to be trying to replenish that inventory, really as the number 1 priority. Then we're going to, as a third priority, we're looking for those completed pieces, right? The Mark 3 detonators, the Mark 7 weapon mods, other finished parts. And for most of these, if you have an inventory of 20 or more, that's more than you're going to use on characters. So you can start spending it, replenish it later. It's not a big deal. Something like the Mark 7 weapon mods, if you have 20 plus, just go over to the scavenger, scavenge a bunch of them up, get your chromium transistors, and go back to buying them when you need them. Carbantes. Whenever you look at Carbantes, whenever they show up in this store, they're almost always going to be below 50. Because like I said, almost every character out there is going to need Carbantes somewhere. That's going to be what's holding up a ton of your stuff in your account. So when you get to 50, you slap that Carbante on somebody right away and you go back below 50. So it'll always be low. But remember, we're looking to make a couple purchases a week. We don't need to go crazy with the amount of materials we need. We just need 20 a week. We just need to get a few of them, and we'll be fine. So we do need to make a couple of those purchases. That's part of the reason why we have a bank. If you've gone for several days and you haven't bought any Carbantes out of here, then really you've got to skip the whole top part of this strategy and just wait for some Carbantes to show up and make sure you stay ahead of that. And then if you've got all that stuff under control and you've got currency in the bank, then of course you can buy characters. Now, what this does is it pretty much means for the average player, you will rarely get to that 3,000 bank because you're always going to have Mark 7 scanners, Carbantes. You're always going to have the high priority stuff to buy. So by buying that high priority stuff, rarely will you ever get to 3,000. And that just means that if you really want to buy a character, you have to think about balancing that character purchase along with all of the other stuff that you need. So you could slow yourself down a little bit, or you could plan well, build up a bank. When you see that you've got a lot of this stuff, your currency's going up, you've got 3,000 in the bank, then you can say, all right, it's time to start grabbing Paplu out of the store or whatever it is that you need. So just to be clear, if we look at this shop from the top down, the top row and the second row are these fill-in gear pieces. They're just stuff that at random we might have to buy. There's a Mark 9 Biotech. We've got 156 we're good on. The Mark 4 Droid Collar. Wish we could buy some of them, but we don't have it in the bank. The Mark 4 Hollow Projector. Mark 5 Detonator. Now, the Mark 5 Detonator we can buy out of the shop for 15 crystals, so we can either buy it out of here or the shop. But this is really going to be the two rows. The two top rows are going to be your fill gear. The third and fourth row. The third row, you see the bio there. That's another piece of fill gear. And then the two pieces where you see the stun cuffs and the hollow projectors, that's where Carbantes will also show up. That's your mid-tier gear. And then below that, you see more fill gear down there. The next two spots, the Nubian Tech Salvage and the Mark 5 Droid Collar, that's the raid-only gear. And that's where your Mark 7 Nubian scanners will show up, only ever in those two slots. And then you've got the Mark 1 Back-to-Gel over there. You can see that I've got 20 of them in stock. Then the next row below that, that's where you have two more of these completed pieces. The Mark 4 Bio and the Mark 3 Droid Collar are completed pieces, 100, 150. I think some of them cost 200 on this row. But that's where you'll find the completed pieces, and then below that are characters. And that structure in the shop is the same every single time the shop refreshes. The top two rows are going to be fill gear. The third row is going to be some fill gear and those two middle pieces. The fourth row is going to be the raid gear and then the completed pieces. So that's the anatomy of the shop. Avoid buying stun cuffs or droid collars or Mark III projectors. Even if you're behind on those materials, you can see I've only got 41 stun cuffs. You could say to yourself, well, just buy a few more of them up. You'll get to 50. You'll be able to advance a character somewhere. Don't do it. Just wait for the game to give you those stun cuffs. Remember, we're doing this over a very long timeline, and statistics shows us we've got enough stun cuffs. We rarely have to make a purchase of stun cuffs, so just let them come to you. Sit back, wait, let them come to you. Buy Carbantes, that's fine. You'll need some of them, but let this other stuff go by. Even if you want to convert it to relic materials or whatever, you're better off saving your currency and using it on the bottlenecks. Squad Arena Store. Build up a bank of at least 2,000. That's not because you expect to need 2,000 currency, but you need a ripcord where if the shard shop has something you really need and you can't generate shard shop currency any other way, you can go in here and make a panic buy and just buy a couple characters that you already have at 7 stars, feed the shard shop, get that piece that you need. So it's always good to keep a bank here for that conversion. The Squad Arena currency does have to be used to buy prestige. I've been buying prestige 3 times a week, and it's been working okay for me. But when you need prestige, you get it from events, but not at a good enough rate. You pretty much have to buy it out of this shop. I say to buy 1,700 per ship. Technically, you need something like 1,900. But I never max the basics on my capital ships. The amount of time that you use the basic is pretty low, so there's not much drive to take the basic all the way up, and that's a way to save at least a little bit of prestige when you're building your capital ship. You know, you don't have to take everything to max. In the bottom right, we're going to check for the Mark 7 scanners, Mark 6 syringes, or Mark 5 furnaces if needed down there. And then second to the bottom, there's going to be some materials that we can use for relics. Again, this is the very bottom of the Squad Arena store. You see that Mark 5 furnace there. That's the slot. And Mark 7 scanners will show up there for $385. Buy them out of there. Mark 1, Mark 2 back to gels show up down here sometimes too, so it's a way to grab some good gear. And then the piece that you see right above that for 150, those are the parts that you can use for bronzium or carbonite. All right. Galactic War Store. Once you get going, you're pretty much just going to do your Galactic War run for the day, get 1,200 currency, and convert 3 ships and just get that in the shard shop. Not much to say there. With the fleet, I like to build a big bank here. I'm comfortable over 3,500. If you struggle to build a bank, there's so much good stuff in the fleet store that it always feels like you can spend to zero, and it's true. You can always spend to zero very quickly in this store. But I've advised people before, just don't buy anything for 2 days. Just ignore the shop for 2 days. If you can get decent fleet placement, after 2 days, you'll already have your bank built up, and then you just do what you would normally do, right? For most players, they got to get the Razor Crest out of here, so you always want to have a bank. If Razor Crest shows up 3 times in a row, you want to be able to buy it. If you don't have Grievous, you need to buy Grievous out of here. So you always need to have enough in the bank to grab those characters every single time they show up. And the rest of it, you're going to use to build your ships and save for Zeta materials. All right, I also use Fleet for emergency shard shop currency, and I put in parentheses here, let the debate begin. All right, I've had this debate with many people who say if you spend shard shop currency over here in the shard shop when you could have been buying Zetas instead, you're crazy. You just need to buy the Zetas. The Zetas are too good. So for myself, I use Zeta materials when the bank is over 5,000. So I go from 3,500. If it gets up to 5,000, then I go ahead and whack it on a Zeta material. Now the argument for shard shop currency. If you complete a Zeta, it's 2,000 per material, which makes it 40,000 for a completed Zeta on a character. If I analyze what I can do in the shard shop for 40,000 currency, that's 100 buys, 152 shard shop currency each, assuming that we're doing ships. So it's 42 purchases out of the shard shop, which represents 170 Gear 12 shards, 2.5 completed pieces, or 32 Electrium conductors. So which would you rather have? Would you buy 1 full Zeta or 2.5, almost 3, the whole left side of your character completed for Gear 13, or 32 Electrium conductors? Now the Electrium conductors doesn't sound like it's that great of a deal. You look at that, oh man, I'd rather have a Zeta instead. You look at the 2.5 completed pieces. Now that's 30 of the gold pieces and 40 of the purple pieces combined together 2.5 times. That's quite a lot. So you could say to yourself, well, that seems pretty good. Maybe I'd rather have that than a Zeta. So I don't know. Maybe there's an argument which one is more valuable to each account. But at the end of the day, I split the difference. So what I do, if I have a bank in the fleet store, imagine that I go over to my shard shop and I need a med packs. Med packs are the thing that you have to buy pretty much every time they show up. So I'm working on a relic character, and all 3 pieces that I need show up. The Gear 12 piece, the gold piece is a piece I need. The 2 purple pieces, I need both of them, and I don't have quite enough currency. I can just go into the shard shop or the fleet store. I can convert a couple purchases into ships, feed the shard shop, buy those materials that I need right now that are in the shop right now, and get them. And I probably do that conversion, I would say 3 or 4 times a week. I have to dip into the fleet store to get what I want and stay on track with the shard shop. But yeah, overall, that's 1 Zeta material that I could have had that I don't. But I'm still probably buying 2 Zeta materials a week. So about 1/3 of it actually ends up going to the shard shop. And it's only in case of emergency break glass kind of stuff that I do when I really want the pieces that are in there. So it's a bit of a balance for me. That's how I do it. Get 1 and get 2 in the guild event store. They're called guild event tokens. The token 1 is the filled in piece, and the token 2 is the one with the little notches in it. In the first 3 months of play, everybody says save your get 1. Let's say you buy the hyperdrive bundle. For the first 3 months, use your get 1 for relicking your first few characters. Get that leg up, get those relic characters going, and then start to save. If you're absolutely free to play and you start at level 1, probably in your first 6 months of play, just spend the get 1 on the Gear 13 parts. You won't be able to feed the shard shop fast enough to keep up and make relics, so instead use the get 1 currency, keep up, make relics. But then once you get your first, let's say 2 or 3 relics, then start saving the get 1, use it for a Wampa, or start saving it for project, gas, Malik, whatever it is you think you're going to do. The Guild Event 2, only used for Negotiator and Malevolence until they're done. Hardcore on this. I spent Get 2 on my main account on other stuff when I first started the game. It was regrettable. I'm telling everybody, only, no matter how tempting it is to do something else, only spend the Get 2 on the Negotiator and Malevolence till they're both done. Period. End of list. Then use it for Kyros. You may need to buy Rolo if you want to do that, etc. By then you can figure it out. If by some miracle you get ahead on Kyros, you can still use this Get 2 for other Gear 13 plus pieces, or use it for injectors. You know, it's there. It's free to use. The GAC store, I've mentioned this before. Until Get 2 is available to buy Kyros, we're going to use this mainly for the Kyro battle computers. You can see in the picture that I have 500 of the battle computers. I really do stock a lot of these because I never want to find myself behind on them. And I'm farming the shock prods, so as long as we have a lot of these, then we can farm up all the shock prods to match and feed our bronzium wiring from the shock prods. Once you get up around 500, then I feel perfectly comfortable buying some shock prods. But yeah, I build up quite a stock of these from the the Grand Arena store. The Shard store, and again, how many times can I say it? The #1 most critical store for this method. We have to feed this with the Galactic War Store and Cantina all the time. We'll use the Squad Store and the Fleet Store as needed to make sure we can get what we want. Bronzium packs go to the Shard Shop to overflow, event shards overflow, and go into your character inventory. Look at the characters all the way down at the bottom. You know, find that Tusken that has, 612 shards, and you may not want to do it, and it costs almost $2 million to take him all the way up to 7 stars. But when you get him to 7 stars and you overflow 300 shards into the shard shop, you got to do it. You got to do it. You got to look for these characters that are overflowing shards, spend on them, get that material into the shard shop, and that way in the future, every time you hit that on a bronzium pack, every time you hit that on an event, it's going to go over to the shard shop and feed it more. You got to spend money on these characters. You got to pop the extra shards and get that fed over to the shard shop. Never buy Grievous. His conversion rate out of here for shards is atrocious. It's absolutely ridiculous. So keep your patience. Buy him only out of the Fleet Store. You got to wait a long time to get all 7 stars on him. But man, it's a disaster if you buy him over here. Just don't be tempted by it. Let me tell you, I've done the conversion, I've done the math. It is absolutely horrible. One of the worst ways to purchase shards in the entire game. Focus on your gear. All right, again with the rows. The top row is the Gear 13 plus pieces. The second row, the first 2 pieces are also Gear 13 plus pieces. Only that third piece in the second row is the gear that we're looking for. So if you look at the second row of the shop, that's where the third row is where we want to be, right? So the third piece on the second row and the first 2 pieces on the third row, that's your Gear 12 gold and your Gear 12 or your Gear 13 purples, whatever you want to call them. That's what we want to buy out of the shard store, and we want to buy these almost every time. You can see this Mark 8 gets used so infrequently that we're way overstocked on it. That's a piece that we won't purchase. But those scanners we're going to buy all the time. We bought the cybernetics in this case because we're under 30 of them. So this is where we want to focus our purchases, these 3 spots. Now there's a bunch of other stuff in the shard shop, but until you get these materials under control for these 3 spots, I really recommend you don't spend anything. If you need extra pulse modulators, buy them out of the guild store. They're over there, 3 for $4.50, so you can buy them out of that shop. You really have to focus this shard shop currency on just these relic materials. Go, go, go. It says shop before Cantina. So especially in the early game on my Loquitur account, I would always do my shopping before I did my Cantina. And if there was a piece in the shard store that I really needed, then I would just divert Cantina energy for the day into that Cantina 3F node, generate a bunch of Kylo in the silencer, and get that stuff out of the shard shop. Again, just you gotta get all those pieces out of the shard shop that you need. If I'm not getting enough relic materials to run the relic rate, it's slow at first anyway, so you can overfarm Kylo. Now, I told somebody that one time, and they said, well, that's a huge waste of resource because you're using your Cantina energy and you're not getting signal data. And my reply to that is, it doesn't matter if I generate enough signal data to relic the character if I haven't generated enough Gear 13 materials to relic the character in the first place, right? You have to actually get him to Gear 13 before the relic levels matter. So to me, feeding the shard shop, getting that material out of there, getting the character to relic is more of a priority than keeping up on signal data. If I come up short on signal data, that's simple. I can just farm more signal data later and get him up to the right relic level. So by using these refreshes in the Cantina, put shards in the shard shop, Cantina currency, again, converts, etc. Feeds the cycle. And then, I put another admonition here. I can't express it enough. This shop, you've got to just shove everything into this shard shop, folks. 35 purchases per week to attain full efficiency. All right, wasted resources, the trade-off. We talked about that already, so we're not going to talk about it again. Moving on. Going higher and wider together. So if you take all the game modes into consideration, the game is definitely, Grand Arena wants you to build more teams. You need more tags for Galactic Challenges. You need more teams for Conquest. There's all of this stuff driving you to broaden out and build more teams and more teams. However, you really do have to build up your key characters. You can't just keep broadening your roster and building more teams and having tons of Gear 12s. You really need to have full Relic teams. You need to get to Relic 5 for the Rancor raid. So you simultaneously have to build up as well as building out. And that's what this program is doing. We're developing characters all the way through Relic level, all the way to the Galactic power and the requirement that's needed for the Galactic Legends. Don't starve your shard shop out of fear of missing out on your next team. Relic the team that you've got. Make that team strong enough. You'll probably get paid out more in the long run than building another team. Conquest store. After many rounds of Conquest, and I spent 21,000 crystals purchasing Cat, I can make the conclusion to never buy anything from the Conquest store ever. Now, I won't say it was a mistake to build Cat. It was a choice. But in making that choice, I gave up, potentially, 210 Cantina refreshes, which is insane. That is, it's a crazy amount of refreshes that I could have done, gotten relic materials, gotten characters, and fed this count even faster. So many crystals that I dumped into this character. And I just don't think a single character can ever be worth what I gave up. So if I'm not buying gear, I'm not buying materials, I'm not buying characters, I'm not buying anything from the Conquest store itself, then where am I using the Conquest currency? Well, as you play in like the first or second zone, depending on whether you're in easy, normal, or hard, you'll find a wandering scavenger who will have for sale these gold Gear 13 and Gear 13 plus pieces for the Conquest currency. If you do the math, it's over twice as efficient to buy the gear than it is to buy character shards for Conquest currency. So even if I was chasing a Conquest character, I would still use the Conquest currency itself on the Gear 13 pieces and then use crystals to buy the character if I had to. So it's always going to be the best choice to convert your Conquest currency into these Gear 13 pieces. On my main account, I can empty the entire store. The Conquest run gives me, I don't remember the exact numbers, but something like 1,600 currency, and I can empty the whole store. And it's either going to be used for actual Gear 13 pieces on characters, can be converted to relic materials. It's just a big chunk of stuff that helps me go faster. And it's very efficient in terms of currency. Very efficient. Okay, take a break, pause the video, go to the restroom, whatever you got to do. We're going to tell this story one last time in terms of energy. Fleet energy. We're going to do only 1 or 2 fleet hard nodes, 3 refreshes a day. All of the other energy is going to go into farming Gear 13 plus materials. If you need more fleet hard farms, slow your relic progress down, but I think the trade-off is manageable. Only a couple hard farms in fleet, push like crazy to get these relic materials. With regular energy, we're going to spend about 250 a day, and it's only going to be on our 3 premium nodes. Spot farming of specific pieces has to be infrequent. We have to get those out of the guild store. We have to get them somewhere else in the game. We have to get them from a guild request so that we can just focus at least 250 energy a day. Light side 7B when we need Kyros shock prods or bronzium wiring. 9F when we need erodium materials or impulse detectors. And dark side 9C for Bactigels and the cybernetics that convert to electrium conductors. So based on what we need most at any given time, we're going to farm a specific node to solve the problem. And it's going to be only one of these 3 nodes. Light side 7B probably 30 to 40% of the time. 9F, if you're doing any relic 8s, it's probably half of what you farm. And then 9C, probably 10 to 20% at the most to fill in where needed for these conductors. Okay? That leaves about 485 energy per day for hard nodes. So in this method, I've only used a little bit of the regular energy every day, and I've left a ton of it for you to do hard farms. Okay? The assumption is we're going to be doing 5 to 6 hard farms, ships, characters, whatever that is, to develop the account to go wider while we're going up. So we've left room for that. It's surprisingly not much energy that we have to spend on these premium nodes. If you don't have 5 or 6 hard farms, again, think about farming some more hard nodes that have characters on them to help feed the shard shop. Instead of farming more normal nodes, it gives you more of a specific type of gear. But again, the shard shop is the key. And if we can include some of those double character, double ship hard nodes, we can keep the shard shop spinning. Cantina energy. Our original basis, 80% of all the energy we spend on Cantina is on signal data. 20% is spent building characters. We're doing at least 3 refreshes per week on Cantina objective day. It's not even that aggressive, okay? That sets the timeline. It's not hard to achieve, but if you're not getting enough crystals, it could increase your timeline, make you struggle to do characters, or, in some cases it may mean, like let's say you're doing Revens or something like that where they're not part of a galactic legend journey and then you have to get them to a certain relic level. Maybe you have to be satisfied with them at lower relic levels for a little while. Mod energy, 3 refreshes a day if you can afford it. It's not part of the gear strategy, but I have to stick it in here somewhere because my grandma always used to say, farm your mods. You knew it had to be in here somewhere, guys. Come on. Conquest energy. Refresh it if you can afford it. My experience playing on my Darth Loquitur account, free to play, I can't afford more than 1 refresh a day on Conquest. My energy is really taken up. My crystals are taken up with all the other refreshes that I need, with the occasional gear purchases that I need. It really doesn't fit, and I don't think the rewards in normal Conquest justify it. On my main account, in hard mode, absolutely justified. I do 3 refreshes a day. The last Conquest, I didn't have to do any 100 refreshes. I was able to complete the red box on Conquest only with 50 energy refreshes. But because you can get a full new character out of there, once you get into hard, you have to push to get the red box and go all the way. And you really have to find the crystals for that because there's no substitute for that anywhere else in the game. So let's recap the entire method. Been talking a long time. You're probably bored to death by now, but we're through it. Let's recap. There's a defined method for acquiring all the gear. For most pieces, let the game give the pieces to you over time at the statistical rate. In total, Carbantes will set the progress rate. That's okay. Rushing the rate will only cause you to outrun the whole rest of the strategy. Use the shops wisely, get your relic materials in the most efficient way, and reduce the need to farm those materials. One final disclaimer. The method is working for me on 3 accounts. One that's just a starting account, one that's a mid-game account, and one that's just hit 7 million galactic power and is approaching the end game. These accounts all, I strive for high fleet placement, and I get high fleet placement. I push my followers, anybody who watches my holocrons, to really try to get a fleet that gets top 10, and if possible, to get a fleet that gets top 5. This strategy really starts to break down if you can't place top 10. You need at least 200 crystals a day out of fleet to make this work. If you can't get that, you will find yourself struggling to meet this strategy. It's based on the assumption that you're going to be highly competitive in fleet. Now, we don't know if they're eventually going to take the fleet arena away. Don't know, can't tell. Crystal income is also influenced now by Grand Arena placement, by wins and losses in Grand Arena, by a lot of other things. So there's a lot of, let's say, variables in the whole equation. But you have to be playing well. You have to win some GACs. You have to win some fleet arena in order to make these strategies come together. Comments are welcome. So I have my strategy. I've laid out pretty much every single thing I can think to tell you guys about how I do and what I do. If you've got comments down below that are even better min-maxing than what I've got, I'd love to hear it. If there's other caveats and ways to spend money or things that I haven't mentioned or thought of, get the conversation started. Just throw it in the comments down below and let's discuss it as a community. And, if you want to start that discussion over on Discord, that's possible too. The link is in the description down below for the holocron. So all comments are welcome. So that wraps up the Maximum Efficiency Guide. Thank you all for your patience. I appreciate each and every one of you. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next holocron.